I found out I was left out of my parents' will while I was still covering their mortgage and groceries. No warning, no explanation, just one cold line buried in a folder. But what happened after that? They never saw it coming, and neither will you. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when the reliable one finally walks away. My name is Grace Whitman, and for most of my life, I've been the quiet anchor holding everything together. Not that anyone ever asked me to be. They never needed to. I simply became that person, the responsible one, the steady one, the daughter who didn't ask for much and always showed up. While others drifted in and out of crisis, I was the one who stayed, who kept the ground from shifting beneath us all. A silent foundation expected uncelebrated and unseen. I wasn't the dramatic child or the rebellious one. That role belonged to my younger sister Lily, the vibrant, impulsive free spirit with an endless carousel of passions and half-finished dreams. She once dyed her hair turquoise on a whim and backpacked across South America with a man she'd known for 2 weeks. When she called home, it was to ask for help, not offer it. And yet somehow, she was always the cherished one. The one who made my mother's eyes light up, whose stories made my father laugh out loud at the dinner table. "That's our Lily," they'd say fondly, as if chaos was just another one of her charms. I used to think love had a structure like a contract, that if you did the right things, loved in the right way, you'd be seen, acknowledged. But I was wrong. Love in our family was loud and reactive. It responded to neediness, not consistency. It poured itself toward the fragile and the fractured, not the capable. So I became capable. When our parents' mortgage payments fell behind, I quietly paid the difference. When the furnace broke in December, I arranged the repair. When my mother's prescriptions changed and confused her, I called the pharmacy myself and sorted it out. They never asked me to. They just didn't notice the problems disappearing. And I never asked for thanks. That's not how I was raised. In our house, asking for gratitude was seen as attention-seeking. You did your part and kept quiet. You showed up and you didn't complain. That was the price of being the good one. I remember once a small thing, but it stuck, driving across town at 11 p.m. because my dad locked himself out. Lily apparently had a party. I had work the next morning, but I didn't say a word. I just showed up, picked the spare key from under the dead potted plant they still hadn't replaced, and let him in. He smiled sheepishly. "Thanks, Gracie," he said, patting my shoulder like I'd just done a grocery run. No one mentioned it again. No one asked how I got home safely or if I was okay. That's the thing about being reliable people. Stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as infrastructure. Like the plumbing or the electricity, you're only noticed when you fail. Meanwhile, Lily once sent a Mother's Day card 2 weeks late, and my mom framed it. I'm not bitter. At least I try not to be. But there's a certain loneliness that settles in when your presence is taken for granted, when your value is measured not by love, but by your utility. Over time, you stop asking for acknowledgement, then stop expecting it, until eventually you start believing you don't deserve it at all. I didn't realize it then, but something in me was slowly eroding. I was giving and giving my time, my money, my emotional bandwidth, and getting back only silence. Not malicious silence, just blank space. As if my care was a natural resource they'd been promised, not a choice I made every single day. People like me don't explode. We don't storm out. We internalize. We become invisible in our own stories, narrated instead by the needs of everyone around us. Until one day, the silence inside us becomes too loud to ignore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story isn't about anger. It's about awakening. It's about the slow, painful realization that being the strong one doesn't make you invincible. It makes you unseen. And one day, even the most dependable fit took me 34 years, a crumpled legal envelope, and one hollow sentence to finally see the truth. But I'll get to that soon. When I think back to my childhood, there's no singular moment of devastation. Just a slow, steady pattern of being overlooked. I wasn't neglected. Not in the way people think of when they hear that word. There were always meals on the table, Christmas presents under the tree, school supplies in my backpack. I had what I needed, and because I had what I needed, no one ever asked if I needed more. I was what teachers called mature for her age, what relatives called so well behaved, and what my parents called low maintenance. It was meant as a compliment, I think, but even at 9 I understood what it meant. I was easy to ignore. Lily, on the other hand, was a wildfire in a sundress. She screamed when she didn't get her way, cried over scraped knees, and needed constant reassurance that she was loved. She got it too, not always in words, but in glances, gestures, the way my mother would bend down to tie her shoes, even after she was old enough to do it herself. I tied my own shoes. I learned quickly that if I didn't make waves, no one had to come rescue me. And if no one had to rescue me, no one had to worry about me. So I swallowed my needs and learned how to breathe underwater. By the time I reached high school, I'd already adopted the quiet role of emotional caretaker. When my father lost his job, I made dinner every night so Mom wouldn't be so tired. When Lily failed math, I stayed up tutoring her even after she threw a textbook at my head. I took on so much responsibility that when I finally graduated college first in our family to do so, it felt less like a triumph and more like a relief. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment I was finally seen. I sent invitations 3 months in advance, bought a new dress, even reserved extra seats just in case they wanted to bring neighbors or friends. They didn't come. An hour before the ceremony, I got a voicemail from my mom. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice laced with nervous apology. "Lily just had a little situation. Her boyfriend surprised her with a trip to the lake. You know how important this weekend is to her. I hope you understand. We're so proud of you. You're our strong girl, right? You don't need us to cheer you on, do you?" And then the line that would echo in my bones for years, "You're the strong one. You don't need anyone, do you?" I sat alone in a sea of parents holding flowers, sisters clapping, fathers taking blurry photos. When my name was called, I smiled, not for the crowd, but for myself. That smile hurt. Afterward, a professor offered to take a picture with me so I'd have something to send home. I still have that photo. I don't look proud. I look like someone pretending to be. I didn't tell anyone how much it hurt. I never did. That was my job in the family, to hurt quietly. Years later, when I mentioned it casually to my mom over dinner, she laughed and said, "Oh, honey, you've always been independent. We knew you'd be fine." But that's the problem, isn't it? They thought being fine was the same as being fulfilled. They mistook my resilience for contentment, my silence for peace. Because I didn't break down, they assumed I never felt broken. And because I kept showing up, they believed I never felt left behind. What I wanted, what I think every child wants, wasn't fanfare or attention. It was acknowledgement. To be seen, not just as the one who copes, but as the one who still needs comfort. But comfort in our house was reserved for the loudest cries, and I had learned long ago how to swallow mine. So I built myself into a fortress. I became capable, calm, and unshakable. At least that's what I told myself. But beneath that steel skin, there was still a girl sitting in a folding chair with a diploma in her lap and no one to hug her. And no matter how many years passed, I never forgot what it felt like to be that girl. It was a rainy Sunday, the kind of day where the world feels muted, as if holding its breath. My father had asked me to come over and help sort through some old paperwork. He said things were getting hard to keep track of bills, tax forms, insurance records, and I was the organized one. That's what I was to them. Not the loved one, not the cherished one, the useful one. I arrived with my laptop and a scanner, ready to digitize half a lifetime of yellowing files and mismatched envelopes. My mother was at her knitting group, and Lily, I assumed, was somewhere brunching in boho heels and stories waiting to be posted on Instagram. Dad had set everything out on the dining room table. He gave me a mug of coffee and disappeared to the living room to watch the news. I worked in silence, slipping into that autopilot mode I'd perfected over the years. One folder after another, electric bills expired, warranties faded, medical statements, all of it routine, all of it expected. Until it wasn't. Near the bottom of a dusty banker's box, I found a dark blue folder labeled Estate Plan and Last Will. I paused. I'm not a snoop. I wasn't looking for secrets, but something in me, curiosity, instinct, maybe just fatigue, told me to open it. Inside were neatly typed documents, legal language, witness signatures, notarized seals. My eyes skimmed through, expecting to find more of the same responsible planning my parents prided themselves on. But then the name stopped me. Lily Whitman, listed again and again. To Lily Whitman we bequeath the family home. To Lily Whitman we leave our full savings account. To Lily Whitman the contents of the safe deposit box. To Lily Whitman the life insurance policy vehicle. Personal effects. There were paragraphs, pages, even outlining contingencies, legal protections, specifics about how her inheritance would be managed if she was out of the country. And then toward the end, a single sentence. To both our daughters, we leave our eternal love and gratitude. That was it. No shared assets. No mention of everything I had contributed over the years. No consideration for the financial help, the emotional labor, the sacrifices. Just love, gratitude, hollow words typed neatly beneath a legacy I had helped hold together. I read it again and again. My hands began to tremble. I couldn't hear the rain anymore. I couldn't hear the news droning in the background. All I could hear was my own heart pounding, my breath going shallow. For a moment, I thought maybe it was a draft. Maybe this wasn't final. Maybe there was a second version somewhere, one that recognized what I'd done, who I'd been. The daughter who never let the house go dark even when her own world was dim. But the dates were recent, the signatures fresh. This was no draft. I stared at the folder as if it had personally betrayed me. In some ways it had. It was the final confirmation of a truth I had long suspected, but never wanted to admit. I wasn't the child they loved most. I was the child they relied on most. There's a difference. And now I saw it in ink. I felt something inside me break, but quietly, like a fault line shifting just beneath the surface. No crash, no explosion, just that awful shattering silence when everything changes and nothing looks different. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it, sat for another minute, maybe longer, then stood, walked to the kitchen and asked my father, my voice too calm to be normal, "Did you mean for me to see this?" He looked up from the television. His face shifted slightly, a flicker of something surprise, maybe guilt. Then he exhaled the sigh I knew too well, the one he used when I asked for more than he wanted to give. "Grace," he said, with nothing behind it, not even an excuse, just my name spoken like a burden. I nodded. Okay. And that was the moment I knew I wasn't the daughter they were proud of. I was the one they used. A shadow they leaned on until it disappeared behind the spotlight they kept shining on someone else. I gathered my things and left. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I didn't burn bridges or make declarations. I simply stopped. It began with small things. I didn't show up that Saturday to check the thermostat like I always did. I didn't remind my father about the water bill's due date. I didn't send the monthly grocery Venmo to my mother, the one she never requested but always expected. I disappeared but gently, like mist evaporating before anyone noticed it was there. And the most heartbreaking part, no one noticed. Not that day, not the day after, not even the following week. I'd spent years believing I was essential, that I was the glue, the gravity, the quiet force keeping everything from falling apart. But when I pulled away, when I gave them the space to feel my absence, what echoed back was silence. A silence so loud it swallowed everything. No phone call, no text, not even a check-in to ask if I was okay. I began to wonder if they even realized I was gone. There was no anger in me, not then. Just something more numbing, something slower, like grief but without a body to bury. I walked through my days in a daze, made coffee, answered emails, smiled at coworkers, and all the while something hollow opened inside me. This wasn't about the will, not really. That document was just confirmation of something much older, something I'd known since I was a little girl, who tied her own shoes and never asked to be carried. I wasn't loved for who I was. I was needed for what I could do. And now that I wasn't doing it, they didn't reach for me, because they never really saw me. Just the things I did. That realization broke something I hadn't known was holding me together. I thought if I gave enough, stayed good enough, stayed useful enough, I would eventually become indispensable. But instead, I'd just become background noise. There's a certain violence in being invisible. Not the kind that leaves bruises, but the kind that quietly erodes your sense of self. You begin to doubt your own presence, to wonder if you were ever there at all. I kept waiting for a message, a voicemail, a missed call. Nothing. By the second week, I stopped checking my phone obsessively. I let the silence stretch between us like an overdrawn breath. I wanted it to ache. I wanted them to feel the shape of me missing. But you can't miss what you never truly looked at. There's something devastating in realizing that your absence is less disruptive than your presence, that all the ways you showed up, all the pieces of yourself you handed over, were never seen as offerings, just expectations, just your job as the dependable one. And when you stop doing the job, the machine doesn't break. It just keeps going as if you were never a gear that mattered in the first place. I started walking in the mornings just to have somewhere to go. I listened to podcasts about boundaries, about emotional labor, about chosen families. I sat on park benches and watched mothers lift children into their laps, brushing crumbs off tiny faces with fingers full of love. I wondered what it would feel like to be tended to like that, to be someone worth holding. I didn't cry, not really. Just felt this dull ache behind my ribs like a question with no answer. They didn't call, and I didn't go back. The first text came on a Thursday morning. I was in line for coffee halfway through a podcast about emotional resilience when my phone buzzed with her name. Mom, hi sweetheart. The water heater's acting up again. Can you take a look before the weekend? Thanks. No, how are you? No mention of my absence. No acknowledgement of the silence that had stretched between us for nearly 3 weeks. Just another item on the list of invisible duties I was expected to fulfill. It wasn't surprising. It was worse than that. It was normal. I stared at the screen for a moment too long, the familiar wave of guilt threatening to wash over me like it always did. But something had changed. This time I didn't feel guilt. I felt insulted. She hadn't reached out when I stopped paying their bills. She hadn't called when I missed my regular Saturday visits. But now that something was broken, something physical, tangible, inconvenient, I was suddenly relevant again. Not as a daughter, as a handyman. I typed back, slowly, carefully. Me. Sorry, you'll need to call someone else. I sent it and slipped the phone into my coat pocket before I could talk myself out of it. 20 minutes later, another message. This time, from Dad. Dad. Grace, don't be dramatic. We just didn't think you needed anything from the will. You've got your life together. That one made me pause. So that was their reasoning. That because I had learned to function without chaos, without needing constant rescue or reassurance. I had also forfeited any right to be considered, to be seen, to be valued. In their eyes, my competence disqualified me from love. I'd always suspected it, but to see it written so bluntly, so carelessly, was like a punch I never saw coming. You've got your life together. As if that were a reason to leave me behind. As if strength were proof I didn't need compassion. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because I knew none of them would matter. Not to him, not to either of them. They weren't reaching out to apologize. They were reaching out to repair the gap I had created, not the emotional one, but the functional one. They didn't miss me. They missed what I did. To them, my silence was an inconvenience, not a wound. My withdrawal wasn't heartbreak, it was poor timing. Later that night, Lily chimed in. Lily. Hey sis, Mom says you're acting weird. Can you chill out? This isn't a big deal. I blinked at the message, my jaw tightening. Not a big deal. She was about to inherit the house I'd paid half the mortgage on for 5 years, the house I'd saved from foreclosure, the house where I'd replaced water heaters, rewired faulty outlets, and installed window insulation in the dead of winter, all without ever being asked. And now the person who'd done none of those things was telling me this wasn't a big deal. I replied simply, me. Then pay the mortgage. Her response came quickly. A laughing emoji followed by girl, I can't afford that. That's your thing. That was the moment it really clicked. They never expected me to inherit anything. Because in their minds, I already had. I'd inherited the responsibility, the obligation, the weight of everyone else's needs. That was my legacy. Not gratitude, not respect, not even acknowledgement. Just the assumption that I would keep showing up. I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone still in my hand, and realized something both devastating and liberating. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Done trying to earn a place I had already paid for in full. Done accepting obligation in place of affection. Done pretending that usefulness was the same thing as being loved. That night, I turned off my phone and went to bed in silence. And for the first time in a long, long time, I slept all the way through. It was a Saturday morning, gray quiet, the kind that usually signaled laundry errands, maybe a walk through the park if the clouds held off. I was still in my pajamas halfway through a cup of reheated coffee when the call came from the front desk. "Hi, Miss Whitman," the attendant said, his voice uncertain. "There are, 2 people downstairs asking to come up. They say they're your parents." My stomach sank. "And your sister's with them," he added. "They say it's urgent." Of course they did. I took a breath so deep it felt like swallowing cement. "Please don't let them up," I said steady. "Tell them I'm not available." He hesitated. "They seem pretty insistent." "I'm sure they do. But I'm still not available." I hung up. 5 minutes later, the text started. "Mom, we're downstairs. Open the door." "Dad, we just want to talk. Be reasonable." And finally, predictably, Lily. "Seriously, Emily, you're making Mom wait in the cold like this. What is wrong with you? What's wrong with me?" "Nothing." What's wrong is that they thought this stunt, the surprise visit, the guilt trip, the manufactured urgency would fix what they'd broken. They still didn't understand. This wasn't a tantrum. This was closure. I threw on a sweatshirt, tied my hair back, and grabbed my keys. My hands didn't shake. Not this time. If anything, I felt more calm than I had in weeks. They were waiting in the lobby. My mother, in pearl earrings and a soft cardigan, looked fragile but rehearsed as if she'd practiced sadness in the mirror. My father stood beside her, arms crossed, unreadable. And Lily, well, Lily, looked like she always did. Perfectly composed, slightly smug, like she was ready to win a debate she hadn't earned. I opened the door just enough to stand in it. Sweetheart Mom started stepping forward. "We just need 5 minutes, that's all." "No," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "You need money, that's all." Her face fell like I'd slapped her. "That's not fair," she whispered. "Neither is leaving your daughter out of your will," I said. "Let's call it even." Dad stiffened. "We didn't come here to argue." "No," I nodded. "You came here to make me feel guilty enough to start paying your bills again." There was a pause. And then Lily scoffed. "Don't drag me into this." I turned to her calmly. "Oh, you're already in it. You got the house, the savings, the promise of everything. So why am I still the one expected to clean up the mess?" No one answered. Because there was no answer. Just the sound of entitlement clashing with consequence. "You raised me to believe family meant love," I said, my arms crossed. "But what it really meant was leverage. And now that you have nothing left to hold over me, you're panicking." Mom's lip trembled. Dad looked away. Lily muttered, "You're being dramatic." I smiled then, not with sarcasm, with something like peace. "No," I said softly, "I'm being done." And with that, I stepped back and closed the door. No slamming, no shouting, just the final breath of a woman who had spent too long holding hers. Because here's what they still didn't understand. I wasn't fueled by anger. I wasn't looking for revenge or retribution. I had simply outgrown the version of myself who believed that suffering was proof of love, who thought being the good daughter meant endless endurance and zero needs of her own. That version of me had finally died the moment I read that will. Because enduring isn't loving, and I was done enduring. I should have known it wouldn't end quietly. 2 days after I closed the door in their faces, my phone buzzed with a notification from Facebook. My mother had updated her status. It was vague, almost poetic in that way, meant to invite sympathy without revealing anything. Sometimes the child you loved most is the one who forgets first. Prayers appreciated. Attached was a photo of us on a family hike, one I had planned, packed for, and paid for. I was in the background of the picture, holding the map, eyes squinting toward the path. The comments poured in like rain. "You were such good parents. So sorry, love. Some kids just forget where they came from." Each one felt like a pinprick, not deep enough to kill, but enough to sting. By lunchtime, my father had chimed in. We raised her with everything she needed, thought she'd care for us in our older years. Instead, she walked away. He tagged me. The meaning was clear. To them, I wasn't the daughter who quietly kept them afloat for years. I was the villain who abandoned ship. They were rewriting history in real time, and I was the antagonist. Then came Lily. She posted a photo to Instagram, her sitting on the porch swing with my mother, arms wrapped around each other, heads tilted just enough for the light to catch. The caption, "Some of us keep showing up, even when others turn their backs." That's what family means. No names, no direct accusations, just enough innuendo to twist the knife and keep her hands clean. The comments were predictably glowing. "You're such a good daughter. Your parents are lucky to have you. Some siblings are just selfish." I sat with it for a long time. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't shared the will. I hadn't exposed the years of quiet sacrifice, or the money I gave, or the emergencies I responded to. I had kept my silence not out of fear, but out of dignity. But they hadn't extended the same courtesy. They didn't want truth. They wanted control. They wanted to shape the narrative, to cast themselves as the victims of my boundaries. And that's when I knew silence was no longer strength. So I opened my laptop and started to type. I didn't rant. I didn't rage. I just told the truth. For 5 years, I supported my parents financially. I paid their mortgage-covered groceries and repaired things in their home, not because they asked, but because I loved them. I never once asked for recognition. I never expected to be repaid. I found out by accident that they left me out of their will. Everything went to my sister. There was no conversation, no explanation, just a line in the document thanking us both. So I stopped. I stopped giving. I stopped showing up. Not out of anger, but out of clarity, because I realized I was being used, and now because I've drawn a boundary, I'm being painted as ungrateful. But boundaries aren't betrayal. Silence isn't peace, and truth isn't cruelty. I hit post, and for the first time since this all began, I felt something close to peace. Not because I had won, but because I had finally stopped hiding. They could spin their stories. They could frame my strength as selfishness. But I wouldn't carry their weight anymore, and I wouldn't be ashamed for putting it down. It came in a cream-colored envelope with delicate handwriting on the front, my full name spelled out in the same cursive my mother used to sign my report cards. A letter, handwritten, as if paper and pen could lend weight to words that had never been said aloud. I held it for a moment, weighing whether to open it or toss it in a drawer like something half-forgotten. Curiosity won. Inside was a single sheet of stationery soft blue with embossed corners, the kind she saved for birthdays or sympathy notes. She had chosen this carefully. "Dear Grace, we're devastated that you've chosen to turn your back on this family over something so minor. The will can be changed, you know that, but your behavior, that will leave a mark. Your sister is trying to help us hold things together. She's heartbroken, though she hides it well. We want to move forward as a family, but you need to apologize publicly. Until then, we're cutting contact for our emotional well-being. Love, Mom." I read it once, then again. Not a single mention of what they had done. Not a word acknowledging the years I'd given, the silence I had held, the line I had finally drawn. No regret, no humility. Just a soft-edged demand, dressed up in concern. What they wanted wasn't reconciliation. They wanted performance, an apology to smooth the surface of their image. They wanted me to soothe their discomfort, not because they believed they were right, but because they couldn't stand being seen in the wrong. They didn't want truth. They wanted comfort, and truth rarely brings comfort to people who've spent their lives avoiding it. I folded the letter, gently slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the back of my drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder of who they really were when faced with accountability, a reminder that my pain, my absence, my voice, none of it moved them as much as the embarrassment of being called out. They could offer inheritance as a carrot, then dangle it like a leash. They could paint me as the problem as long as no one looked too closely. But I wasn't the same daughter anymore. The one who once thought love meant always saying yes. The one who confused loyalty with silence. The one who swallowed hurt and called it patience. That girl had burned away in the quiet nights of being forgotten, and now I wasn't angry. I was clear. Clear on the difference between manipulation and remorse. Clear on the value of my voice even when it made others uncomfortable. Clear that forgiveness doesn't always require a reunion and boundaries don't need a permission slip. I didn't write back. I didn't owe them comfort for the cost of my peace. There was one memory I hadn't let myself revisit. Not because I'd forgotten it, but because I'd buried it so deeply it had almost stopped aching. It was 3 years ago, maybe 4, a spring afternoon that should have felt like a pause, a breath, but I had spent the morning in the emergency room helping my mother navigate a sudden spike in blood pressure and a complicated tangle of insurance denials. I missed work that day, missed meetings' deadlines, lost an entire bonus that quarter without telling anyone, because she had called crying, and that was enough. After hours of triage paperwork, phone calls to doctors and pharmacists, I finally brought her home. She seemed tired but stable, so I tucked her into bed with her medication and made sure the humidifier was running in the corner. That night, they invited me to stay for dinner. I didn't want to. I was drained, but I said yes. Of course I said yes. The kitchen smelled like vanilla frosting when I walked in. There on the counter was a birthday cake with pink-piped letters. "Happy birthday, Lily." I blinked. Wait, isn't Lily's birthday next week? My mother smiled distractedly. "We're celebrating early. She'll be busy next weekend, something with her boyfriend. She asked us to do it now, so—" My father walked in with a bottle of wine, and they were suddenly cheerful, bustling with energy. My mother handed me a knife. "Do you want to cut the cake, sweetheart?" I looked down at the frosting. I had just spent 6 hours in an emergency room advocating for her. Paid for prescriptions she couldn't afford, missed work to hold her hand, and this was the thank you, a cake for the daughter who wasn't even there. Something inside me flickered. "I think I'm going to head home," I said, handing the knife back. "Oh," my mother said, her face falling just slightly. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," I said and left. I didn't cry on the drive home. I didn't scream. I just sat in silence, hands gripping the wheel, wondering why it had never occurred to them that I might need something too. That night I almost called them, almost said it, almost asked, "Do you see me at all?" But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. Instead, I called Joanne. She had been my best friend since college, sharp, funny, unflinchingly honest. When I told her what happened, she didn't rush to comfort me. She didn't sugarcoat. She asked me one question. "If they weren't your family, if they were just people, would you let them treat you like this?" I didn't answer right away, because no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't tolerate this kind of emotional neglect from a boss or a friend or a stranger on the street. I wouldn't keep pouring from an empty cup just because someone else felt entitled to the spillover. But with family, we're taught that endurance equals love, that putting ourselves last is noble, that blood gives people permission to bruise us over and over so long as they say they love us afterward. That night I cried, quiet, exhausted tears, because Joanne had put into words something I had never dared to admit. Love doesn't excuse harm, and kinship doesn't grant immunity from accountability. That moment, that truth, was the beginning of the end. And now, years later, I still remember that cake, the frosting, the candles, the sound of my own silence. It was the last thing I let go. Not because it hurt the most, but because it was the moment I knew I had never truly been seen. The final break didn't come with a bang. No shouting, no slammed doors, no grand declarations. It came in silence. One morning I canceled the automatic payments I had set up for my parents' utility bills. I deleted the grocery reminders from my calendar. I unsubscribed from the insurance alerts I had signed up for on their behalf. Then I packed. I didn't tell anyone, not Joanne, not my coworkers. I just rented a U-Haul, loaded my books, my grandmother's dishes, the worn couch I'd once paid to have steam cleaned after Lily spilled wine on it, and I left. New city, new job, new number. Some people run from disaster. Others walk away from it so quietly that it barely notices they're gone until the emptiness settles in. I was the second kind. I found an apartment near a river. Nothing fancy, just enough light, enough quiet, enough space to feel like mine. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a knot in my chest or a to-do list that wasn't mine. The first week I slept a lot. Not out of laziness, but because my body was finally allowed to rest. The second week I found a support group. It met on Wednesday nights in a modest community center with chipped paint and mismatched chairs. The flyer called it Women Rewriting Their Story and promised a space for those untangling from emotionally manipulative families. I almost didn't go. I almost convinced myself I was fine. But something in me, something newly brave, pushed through the door. The room was warm in that way only spaces of shared pain can be. There were women in their 20s, 60s, middle-aged mothers, recent divorcees, a grandmother who had cut ties with a son who never saw her as anything but a bank. One woman, Marie, talked about how her father guilted her into loaning him money for 20 years. Another, Dana, had been her siblings' emotional garbage can for a decade until she moved across the country and stopped returning their calls. I didn't speak the first night, just listened. But when I walked out, I felt seen in a way my family had never managed to make me feel. In that circle of strangers, I found the thing I'd searched for so long, understanding without expectation. Every Wednesday after that, I showed up. I shared stories, not just the worst moments, but the quiet ones. The birthday cake, the unopened letter, the way being strong had become a burden I hadn't agreed to carry. And every time they nodded, not with pity, but with recognition. Because here's the thing, no one tells you cutting ties isn't the same as cutting love. You can still love people who hurt you, still mourn what could have been, still wish for something better while walking away from what is. Leaving wasn't about vengeance. It was about survival. Not just physical or financial, but emotional, spiritual. The kind of survival that lets you breathe deeper and sleep sounder. The kind that allows joy to enter in small ways again. Some mornings I sit by the river with coffee and a journal. I write not to remember but to rebuild. I've stopped waiting for apologies, stopped needing explanations, and I've learned that peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the absence of obligation to people who never valued your presence in the first place. I didn't leave because I hated them. I left because I finally loved myself enough not to stay. It came through email. A plain subject line. Dinner. I hadn't seen my mother's name in my inbox in months. It looked strange among the newsletters and work notices like a relic from another life. Her message was short, too short. We're having dinner this Saturday. It would mean a lot to have you there, just us as a family. Love, Mom. There was no mention of the past, no reference to the letter she had written, the will, or the Facebook posts. Just a quiet assumption that I might want to come back and sit at the same table where I'd once been so thoroughly erased. I reread the message twice. My stomach didn't twist the way it used to. My hands didn't shake. I just felt still. I closed my laptop. That evening, I walked to the river. The air was crisp, the sun low. Families walked dogs. A man played guitar near a bench, the melody soft and simple. I thought about what it would mean to go back not just to the dinner, but into that version of myself they had always needed me to be. Smiling, polite, useful, quiet. And then I thought, what would I gain? There would be no real apology, no recognition, just a reset to the roles we'd all memorized. They'd pretend I had never left. I'd pretend I didn't know why I had. I took a deep breath and walked home. The next morning I replied, "Thank you for the invitation. I won't be able to attend. I hope you enjoy the evening. Grace." No anger, no explanation, just truth. I sent it and felt no need to reread. Hours later, my phone buzzed with a message from Lily. "You're really something. Mom is trying to make peace and you can't even bother to show up for one dinner. You're so selfish. There it was, that word again. I had been called responsible, strong, mature, dependable, until I said no. Then I was selfish. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed slowly. I'm not selfish for choosing peace. I'm not cruel for choosing distance. For the first time, I'm choosing myself. And if that offends you, it says more about your expectations than it does about my decision. I hit send. No emoji, no softness, just a boundary. I knew what would happen next. Maybe silence, maybe more guilt, maybe another Facebook post. But none of it mattered now, not really. Because when you stop serving the role someone needs you to play, they don't see your growth. They see betrayal. But I didn't need them to see it anymore. I saw it. Every morning I woke up in a space that felt like mine. Every Wednesday I sat in a circle of women who had shed the same old masks. Every time I chose my peace over their comfort. That was the truth they couldn't rewrite, and I was no longer afraid to live in it. The sun was setting when I finally sat down. My porch faced west, an accident of architecture that had become one of my greatest comforts. From here, I could watch the sky transform slowly and without apology from gold to fire to indigo. I held a cup of tea in my hands. It had gone cold, but I didn't mind. Some moments don't need warmth, they need stillness, and I had learned to treasure stillness. There was no noise, no buzzing phone, no messages asking for favors, no guilt disguised as concern. Just me, the breath of wind across my face, and the sound of distant laughter from a neighbor's open window. I should have felt lonely, but I didn't. I felt unburdened. I had walked away from the only family I'd ever known, closed a door that would never open quite the same again. And somehow, instead of feeling empty, I felt full of my own voice, full of space that had once belonged to others' demands. Full of peace I had paid dearly for, because peace I've learned is not a gift, it's a cost. You buy it in small sacrifices, in tears shed quietly in the dark, in texts not answered in invitations, declined in stories told aloud, even when your voice shakes. And you keep buying it step by choosing yourself, even when others call that selfish. A few days ago, I received a letter, not from my mother, not from Lily. This one came from someone I didn't know. A woman named Clara from Ohio. She had found my story online, read the post I'd written months ago, the one where I finally spoke up after years of silence. Her handwriting was soft, slanted, with tiny hearts over the eyes. I don't know you, she wrote, but I see you. I read what you wrote and cried for 2 days, because it was the first time I felt like I wasn't crazy. Like maybe I wasn't the problem. Yesterday I packed my bags. I left a house where I was only useful, never loved. You gave me permission to go. Thank you. I read it twice, then held it to my chest and cried not out of grief, but out of awe. Awe that my pain had become someone else's courage. Because sometimes when you survive something, you think the best you can do is move on. But sometimes survival becomes light. A path others can follow when they can't see their own yet. I don't know if Clara will find what she's looking for, but I know she's closer to it than she was before. And so am I. I'm not perfect. There are days I miss the idea of family, days I wonder what it would be like to be celebrated, not just needed, to be loved loudly, not used quietly. But I don't miss the reality. I don't miss the exhaustion that was always disguised as duty. I don't miss the emotional debt that never got repaid. I've started writing again, nothing serious, just journaling, sometimes a poem. Once, I even wrote a letter to my younger self. I told her she was brave for caring, and even braver for walking away, and I reminded her of something she never heard enough. You don't have to earn love. You deserve it by breathing, by existing, by being. As the last light melted into the horizon, I whispered a quiet truth into the dusk, one that had taken me years to believe. I didn't lose my family, I just stopped pretending I had one. And in that space, finally I found peace. Peace I had paid for in silence, in distance, in truth. Peace that cost everything, but was worth every step.